The next set of tutorials are going to be covering some modeling basics. We're going to kind of introduce a little bit of the CAD commands and how they're used in respect to hand drawing. The information that I'm going to present to you is going to be coming from a book that was written by Francis D.K. Ching. It's called Architecture, Form, Space, and Order. It is the second edition. The publisher is from New York, from Van Nostrand Reinhold, and it was published in 1996. So if you like the images that you see here, definitely go out and purchase this book and read more, because what I'm about to give you is the condensed, compressed, quick and dirty form of this book, and it may not give you the full breadth or the complete comprehensive version of what you might really need. So I'm just going to give you enough just to get through Civil 3D. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the prime generators of form. So basically everything that you see in 3D space you can pretty much generalize as a point, a line, a plane, or something that has volume. So if we look at our CAD commands, we can kind of see this very similarly. Because as Autodesk develops the software, what they had in mind was the ability to model things. So we have a command for points, and there's several different kinds of points that you can create. And this is indicated by our drop-down menu right here. If we click on the drop-down menu in CAD, there's several ways that we can make a point or connect two points together to make a line. And this is the line command. This is also a line command, but it's not used as much. There's two forms of lines. This has its own use. It's not as editable as this version of the line. This is called a polyline. And generally when we model things, we always use polyline instead of the regular line. And this one here allows you to create a rectangle. So these are basic, real basic forms. And then we have some other buttons here off to the side. We have the ability to create an arc, and we can create a circle, and we can create an ellipse. So I'm just going to switch over to CAD real quick and just look at these commands. And in CAD, what we actually need to do in order to see those, like we saw in the PDF file, is to click this drop down and switch to 2D drafting and annotation. And then we start to see these commands appear up here at the top. So I just want to show you what is contained within this drop down for arc. So if I click this drop down, Autodesk tries to recognize that, people just don't draw arcs with 3 points. They don't go click, click, click. So they want to recognize, the different ways that you may need to draw an arc depending upon, the situation that you have in your drawing. So in here are several ways that you can draw an arc, and I highly recommend, I'm not going to show you each one, but I recommend you experimenting. Notice when I roll my mouse over something, there's a little description in there. You can even press F1 while you have your mouse here. It'll open that part of the help menu for you. So let's take a look at circle. Circle has something very similar going on with it. There's more than one way to draw a circle. You don't have to just draw a circle by clicking on a point saying that that's the radius. You see here, 1 is where you would click first for radius, and 2 would be, well, the 1 would be the center and the 2 would be the radius. But let's just say you want to draw a circle by diameter. Well, you do have that option here. You can specify the center point and then specify the diameter of the circle versus a radius. Maybe you just want to draw a circle with just 2 points. You're not really interested. You don't want to specify the diameter or the radius. You just want to click the 2 tangent points. And then there's the ability to do it with 3 points. This is probably particularly useful for a kind of like a turnaround situation, like what we have over there by Hy-Vees. And then this one here, if you want to do it by tangent, tangent, radius. And like I said, if you want to be really, really proficient in 2D drafting, I would highly recommend just going in here, just playing with these commands and just becoming very familiar with how they work. Alright, so I'm just going to click off, and we have ellipse, and there's several ways that you can draw an ellipse as well. And if I click on this little draw thing down here, there's an extended menu with more things that you can draw. So these are here more 3D polylines, and we have helix, a donut, kind of a cloud, a revision cloud, a wipeout, boundaries, gradient. So I really recommend that you just go in here and just start playing with some of these commands just to become familiar with how they work and determine, which some people use the entire range of tools, where some people prefer to only use 2 or 3. So I'm going to go back to my PDF here, and I want to talk a little bit about the keyboard commands. If you don't want to have to click on buttons and want things to move a little bit faster, you can type in the command line instead. So for point, you would just type in the word point. So let's just do that really quick in CAD. And before we switch to CAD, I want to mention that if you want to do polyline, you just type in P-line, and if you want to do rectangle, you just type in rectang. We switch back to CAD, get rid of my screen sketches here. So up here, down at the bottom, we have a command line, and I can type in P-line. Now you notice that we are now in a polyline command, so if I click and then press enter, we have a polyline, and when I click on it, it's editable because we see little handles here which will allow me to change it. It even tells you the width in here, which is pretty handy. Let's try rectang, R-E-C-T-A-N-G. So now we're in the rectangle command, and we notice in here that there are several sub-option commands. We have the ability to chamfer it, give it an elevation, a fillet, a thickness, and a width. So for now I'm just going to leave it the way it is. You can always go back and specify these things later. So let me just draw a square here. So I'm just clicking and then clicking again. And then if I select the square, I can type properties. And these are all of those options that we saw in the sub-option menu. So we can go in here and we can change things. We can give it an elevation. We won't be able to chamfer or those kind of things, but you can definitely, while you have this object selected, go up here to modify. And notice that we have the ability to edit the hatch. And I believe this one is our fillet. So we have fillet or chamfer, those same commands that we saw. So if you want to do it when you create the object, you certainly can, or you can do it after you create the object. Totally dependent upon how you want your workflow to be. And then our last one is point. So I'm going to just type in point's not used as much, but I just wanted to throw that out there in case you do need to create a point. So I'll just single click here and a point is created. You really can't see it, but if I highlight it with my mouse like this, by the way, when I click in the drawing, this black area is called the drawing space. When I click, I have a little window selection. So it's usually from lower right to upper left. And then if I completely enclose this or partially enclose it, it will select that. So you really can't see the point very well, but there's my point. So let me go back to my PDF file here and let's take a look at the next slide. In the drafting world, points help us to kind of start a drawing. So you see here in this upper left one, we see that we're using point as a means to create these radiating lines. And over here, again, we see this point in the middle that's used to create these lines that are kind of offset from the center. And then over here, we see a point again that is used to create this design from which everything is based off of. As the prime element of the vocabulary form, a point can serve to mark the two ends of a line, the intersection of two lines, the meeting of lines at the corner of a plane or volume, and the center of a field. And we can see several examples of this going on here. So if we had to draw something like this that radiates out, even though the lines are a bit irregular, what we would probably do is just start with one line, and we can either do a copy and rotate, or we can do an array, or maybe we draw only one half of it and mirror it several times. And then this one over here, this would be an offset. So we would create probably this very first ring here, and then from there offset it so many feet from the center. So this button here, this is the offset button. Not that one, sorry. This one here is the offset button. If we want to copy things, that's this button up here. So the command for copy is CO. If we want to rotate objects, make copies and then rotate them so that we can create copies like this, kind of a long way of doing it, but if you prefer it that way, or if you just create something and you decide you want to rotate, so maybe you created this square first where it was just, like this one here on the inside, and now you want to rotate it to create interest, you can certainly do that without having to redraw it again. This is the rotate command, and we would just type rotate. And there's several other buttons going on here. So this one is kind of the trim button. You can also trim or extend a line. So say that you wanted this line only to come out this far, and you have an actual object, maybe this is edge of paving or something. You can click on this button here, which is the trim button, and then select the object you want to trim off, or select the object you want to use as the cutter, and then press enter, and then select the object that you want to trim off, which would be this line extension over here. And then we have offset. And offset, you can just type O on the keyboard to get offset command going in the command line instead. And like I said, you don't have to use these commands in the keyboard. Some people prefer it because it's more efficient, so they don't have to move their mouse all the way to the top of the screen. You can definitely use buttons instead. We also have mirror. So if you have something that's perfectly symmetrical, mirror would save you a lot of time. And then array is when you have multiple objects going on at once and you just want to create an array. So let's just see some help menu examples of this within Civil 3D. So let me get rid of my sketches here. So this is this group of menu items here. It's called modify. And if I roll my mouse over the copy command, and it gives you an example of how it makes copies. So you select all the things you want to make copies of, and then you click somewhere else and you make a copy. So for example, that red arrow where it says 1, 2, 3, 4, this person wanted to make copies of this meeting room, wanted another meeting room right next door. So instead of redrawing the entire meeting room, he just made a copy of it instead. Very powerful tool. Next one is rotate. Rotate's pretty self-explanatory. You want to rotate the table around, you certainly can. This one here is to stretch something. So there's an example of stretching. This button allows you to bring to the front or bring to the back. Sometimes you have a line on top of another line and you really can't see it, so this allows you to bring objects forwards and backwards. There's also a drop-down menu here, which also allows you to play with bringing things forwards and backwards. This one here, send hatches to the back, is an underutilized tool. Lots of students will have their hatch lines on top of their drawing lines, which makes it very hard to see the definition of spaces. So definitely use this one a lot. Send your hatches to the back. Hatches always go to the back. This one here is to rescale. So we can see in the help menu here that you want to make an object bigger. This one is for offsetting. This is where, like in that one example we saw, we have several of these little rings we want to create. Instead of having to create them each one by one, you just use the offset command. So if we wanted to make this box here, we want to create a few more of them going outwards from here, we would use the offset command. The next one over is mirror. So if you have a perfectly symmetrical object, instead of having to draw the other half from scratch, you just mirror it. And then this one is trim, and I talked about this earlier, if you've got a line that's too long. So for example, in the picture on the left they show a doorway, but there's a wall going through the doorway, so they want to trim that out. So what they do is they use those lines that kind of defines the edge of the door where number 2 is at, and there's another one on the other side, of course. They click that as the cutter, and then they press enter, and then where the dashed lines are at, where 3 and 4 is at, they would use that, they would click on those to trim those off. You can also extend. So if a line's too short and you want it to go to a line, you can extend the line. And we can see an example here. So we see 1 is the edge that we want the line to extend to, 2 the line that we need to extend the line that needs to actually go to 1. And we can see the end result in the bottom diagram. This one is the erase tool. We can also type E on the keyboard to erase things. So say that your client says, I don't want the meeting room in the middle, get rid of it. All you got to do is type E or click on this eraser button and then go through and just start deleting things. And this one is explode. This is usually not used too much. It's only used when you W block something and import it or insert it into another drawing, and you need to explode it so that it's editable. This one is the array command. This is very useful, very powerful if you know how to use it. So you can see in the example, the row of chairs to the left, we have one chair. They're going to use that one chair that they want to spin around the table. So instead of having the mess with the copy command and the rotation command and getting things just perfect so it completely circulates around that table, you would use the array command instead, which creates copies and will also do an angle for you like they show around the table. They get those chairs perfectly around the table. This command, I will tell you, is a little bit challenging for most. So if you think this is something that you really want to learn, I would definitely practice with it. Just create a couple of scenarios, just create maybe a bunch of circles and a square, and just practice playing with this command. I will tell you that people who do spend the time to learn this command find this very powerful, and it saves them a tremendous amount of time. So let's go back to our presentation here, and notice that the modify panel does have a little extended drop down with more things going on the inside here that you can definitely explore. We see several examples of this being used in history. So we see a point in the center, and that buildings are arranged around this point or around this piazza based on this point here. So we see that this is kind of centered here. This is basically the center of interest. So we see that there is kind of like a hidden line that leads to there, and we got something very similar going on here. It doesn't have to be exactly on center. It's maybe a little offset. We do that on purpose to create visual interest. And we see it again coming in through here. And usually it's not perfectly on center. But the whole point is that all these buildings are arranged based on this center point here. And then we see that several other types of forms, volumetric type forms, are based off the point. So we have a circle here where we have the center, and then from the center a radius is specified, and then a circle is drawn from there. And we see the same thing with the cylinder. We have another center that is defined. It's just like the circle, a radius, and then we have a height. And these are, by the way, called primitives. They're called primitives because there's a math equation that is associated with a circle and a cylinder. And then we have a sphere. So again, we have a radius, and then we also specify a pi value to define this circle. And now I want to talk a little bit about lines. And here, with these type of lines, they're kind of like implied lines. So we have a couple of points, and like I mentioned before, when you connect two points together, you have what is called a line. And in this particular case, this line here is kind of used as a kind of like a construction or a reference line to split this circle in half. And I see a lot of people that draft. There's different, of course, ways to do it. I happen to know one person with every drawing that he does. So for example, this is his sheet of paper. And the first thing he does when he sketches a scene is he draws a line through the middle, and he draws another line down the middle of the paper, like this. And pretty much everyone who's really good at drawing, they do this. Maybe not exactly like this, but something that's very conceptually similar. They use some sort of reference lines. I'm going to call these reference lines or construction lines, whatever you guys want to call them. They're basically invisible lines. Some people will actually physically draw them on the paper, while other people will, in their minds, are capable of projecting it onto the paper, imaginary lines. But other people can't see it, but when they look at the paper, they can see it. And this is something that I'm kind of able to do. I'm able to I don't have to draw these lines. When I look at a sheet of paper, these lines are already drawn for me, and all I have to do is just locate things based on a grid system. So I happen to know one person who does his exactly like this. He draws a horizontal line and a vertical line. This is how he teaches sketching. And then he begins to use these lines to start locating elements that's in his drawing. So it's going to be based so many this way. So this is like a coordinate system. So many that way. He's got so many going this way and so many going. He locates everything based on this little grid that he sets up. He draws on the paper. And he draws it on the paper mostly so that he can teach others how to do this. And this line he uses as a vanishing point line, or the horizon. And then this line he kind of uses as a reference to the center of his paper. And generally he doesn't have anything going down the middle. It's either to the left or to the right of this line, because he also utilizes the rule of threes. So here, this is what we're pretty much doing here. We're connecting 2 points. Sometimes you use a reference line. If you notice here, we have perfectly vertical and perfectly horizontal lines. So this is perfectly horizontal. This is perfectly vertical. And in the drafting world, in order to accomplish this task, we use, if you guys remember, a T-square and a triangle. So when we draw a line that goes across here, it's perfectly horizontal. And if we had to draw a vertical line, we would use the edge of this triangle to draw a line that was perfectly vertical. So now you're probably wondering, well, can we do that in CAD too? Because, I don't want to have to try to eyeball that in. Yes, we can. We can definitely do that in CAD. So if you go to CAD, and if you notice here, I drew my first line, and it wasn't exactly perfectly horizontal or vertical. And right now I have some snaps on that's allowing me to kind of eyeball it in. But what if I didn't have any snaps on, or any of that information that could help me with this? If I had nothing. So let me just draw that again. You could use this button down here at the bottom, which is called Ortho. And this is a very powerful tool because it will allow you to draw things perfectly horizontal, which means perfectly horizontal in our X direction over here. Or you can draw things perfectly vertical, which is in our Y direction. Of course, we're looking down in plan view. I also want to mention that this ortho command is also very useful if you're drawing in 3D. So if you want things to go perfectly in the positive Z or in the negative Z direction, this will allow you to do this as well. So let's just see an example of this live. I'm going to click on this button here. I'm going to click on my Polyline button, and I'm going to try to draw something here. And if you notice, I can't do anything in between. It's either true north or true east and west or true south. There's no in between. And that's what this is, like a T-square and triangle. So this allows you to draw perfectly north-south and perfectly east-west. I do want to mention that this is a very underutilized button down here. I see lots of students who try to eyeball it true east-west and true north and south, especially when they go to do layout and dimensioning. I have students who try to, like, for example, draw dimension lines here, so they just eyeball it in. So if you zoom all the way in, it looks something like this. I mean, if it's zoomed all the way out, you really can't tell. But when the contractor goes to build this, they can't. They can't because the dimensions don't match up. So to avoid this kind of problem, all you have to do is turn on Ortho. And then turn on your snaps, of course, so you can snap to this corner, and it will go true east and west. And since we kind of talked about snaps, kind of hinted at it, let's go ahead and just look at our snaps here. So this button over here is called Object Snaps. If I right-click on it and go to Settings, these are the different ways that my cursor can connect to an object. So if we see a little square symbol, it means it's going to connect to the object's endpoint. If we want a midpoint, we can check in midpoint. If we want center, we can do center, nodes, quadrants, intersections, the whole 9 yards. And there's other types of things too here, is perpendicular, insert. Some people, they don't like to use the snaps. They'll turn their snaps off. So they'll just turn their snaps off. So if they draw a line out here, And the reason why they turn it off, because they don't want to be snapping all over to things. So if I turn it on here, you'll see that I could accidentally snap to this endpoint, I could accidentally snap there, and if you have a bunch of things going on in your drawing, it might snap all over the place, and that isn't what you want. And let's just say, so you notice if I want to draw something perfectly perpendicular to the edge of this box here, I'm not going to be able to do that unless I go in here, which is an extra step. You know, I have to right click on here, go to settings, or check in perpendicular, and it just takes too much time. So what some people prefer to do is they'll just turn their snaps off, and then what they have memorized is all the little keyboard shortcuts for those snaps. So if I want this perpendicular, I would type in PERP, and then click there, and I know that that is perpendicular. And if I draw something else, so let's do another P line, and let's just say I want the end of this thing here, I would just type in end, END, and it'll snap there. So those keyboard commands can be very useful if you can memorize them. I'm going to right click here and go to settings. And right now I have my object snaps off. So endpoints, you can either type in endpoint or type in end, mid for mid, center, node, quadrant, INT for intersection. I think EXT is for extension. Don't use this one as much. We have insertion, perpendicular, PERP, tangent or TAN, near, so I just type in the whole word near. So if you're not sure what the short version of this is, sometimes if you type in the full word, that will also activate the command too. So let's go back to our PowerPoint here. Go to the next thing. So here's some examples of some lines, some linear objects, basic form here. So here's a nice long linear landscape going on across here. We see another one down here towards the bottom. And we can see that everything is ranged based on this line. And there's another one here, and then this one, everything is arranged along this linear axis. And those of you who've had architecture history, you're pretty familiar with these places. Alright, so let's go ahead and go down another slide here, and we see other forms of lines. Sometimes lines, if drawn in the z-plane, can create kind of like a wall or a barrier, or this notion of a plane. And we can see here with the repetition of lines, so we kind of have an implied line going on through here with these points. Helps create a wall type space. And we can, just model up one of these columns, and then we would use this copy command here. Or you could use the array command to get the job done and basically create multiples of these columns. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide here. We see examples of how linear objects are basically copied to begin to define space. So we have these linear objects here that define the wall plane. And then we see it again going across the top here to create this ceiling plane. So by having several of these planes, you can now begin to define space. So we see that here in this little study room that this person is in, or lounge room. And we see it here with this overhead trellis, how these basic linear forms can help define space. And the repetition of a form also helps create rhythm. And as I've kind of implied before, we begin to see where if we begin to connect all of these lines together, we begin to form planes, which now helps us build three-dimensional space. We have an overhead plane, we have walls, and we have a base plane. Now we're not exactly architects. Well, we are, but we're not the traditional kind where we go out and we build buildings and such. We use the landscape instead. So our base plane would have things like grass or ground cover on the ground plane, and then in this previous image that we saw before, we wouldn't necessarily be using columns. Instead of columns, we would be using trees. So we would use trees to define space. These may be really tall trees. And then this stuff on top of here, we wouldn't exactly use pieces of wood or boards that go across the top here to define the ceiling plane. Instead, what our work involves mostly is tree canopy. So our ceiling plane would be the tree canopy. So we are kind of like traditional architects, but we are, I would say, a bit more creative in the way that we define space. Our work tend to be a little bit harder, especially when we're dealing with plant material, because we need to have a lot of technical knowledge about how plants grow, what their form is going to be. And we want to make sure that, it's not like how a building is, because, with a building, the wood's already dead, it's not going to change. But with live plant material, there's a lot of technical knowledge that goes into the background to ensure that plant survival, so that your design will grow to what it was intended to be, basically. So here's some more examples of planes being utilized to form space. Create kind of an interesting scene here. Again, we see form and planes being used, so we have this facade here that's being used to create this square form.